Sorry, I don't love you. Afraid I've grown accustomed to. Cause with you if something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy. Hope that's inspired by the bottle at the pharmacy. Why does it seem like everybody knows everyone but you? Oh baby, I think you're all the
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back with our 6th episode, and for this episode I have Bobby Darling on, and we are going to be talking about Star Wars, The Clone Wars, the animated series. But first, Bobby, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Pretty good, and I know this show is one that you get really excited about, and with me just having somewhat recently binge watched it, it felt like a great topic for us to start off with. I know you'll probably be back on the podcast for more topics down the road, but this felt like one we could both really just geek out about right now. So when did you first watch The Clone Wars? Did you watch it as it was on, Cartoon Network and that final season, I believe, dropped on Netflix? Or did you kind of do what I did and watched it all on Netflix later so you could watch it all right through?
So I'd seen several episodes kind of piecemeal over the years and always really thought it was good. And I want to say I was like downloading episodes just piecemeal occasionally too as well. That I didn't catch on TV, but I never actually watched the whole thing until just this past year. I tore my rotator cuff at work, so I was off work for like 8 months. So I just totally binged through the entire thing in the period of about a month, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know once I saw it was all on Netflix, I was like, all right, this is my project for, like you said, about a month or so. And I think it was definitely a little over 100 episodes. So
yeah, yep.
it was a lot to take in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, I think each episode's like 22 minutes, so it comes out to like a little over 30 hours of just Star Wars magic. So it's definitely for not for the faint of heart to binge it, but I had the best time.
Yeah, as did I. And the thing is, I started watching Star Wars Rebels before I even watched this show or really knew all that much about it. And the main reason for that is, Star Wars Rebels is on its 3rd season, and a kid I went to high school with, he voices Ezra in it. So that's how I got into that one and knew, it was happening because I saw him tweet about it, that he was going to be on the show. So I got into that, and then everyone was like, oh, you really need to watch The Clone Wars then if you're enjoying Rebels. So that's what started it for me. Did you watch all of The Clone Wars first before Rebels even came on the air?
I've only watched the first season of Rebels so far.
Okay.
But yeah, I watched Clone Wars before Rebels. I was actually a little reticent to get in with Rebels because I don't hate, but it does feel like the tone is like slightly different, especially the first season. It feels like it's a little bit aimed at a more youthful audience.
Right.
But as it's gone along, it's gotten kind of darker. Like this last season, with Ahsoka returning and Darth Vader and everything, like it kind of started exploring some very adult territory that I really enjoyed. So, but yeah, I got into Clone Wars first.
Yeah, so I obviously do things a little backwards sometimes, but I think it worked out because I started watching this before this new season of Rebels aired, so it really filled in a lot of pieces for me, especially with Ahsoka's character, because she's the only one who shows up in both so far.
Hold on a second. So you were first exposed to Ahsoka on Rebels?
Yes, I think she had made a brief appearance before I heard about Clone Wars, and
you're like, who is this?
Right. I was almost like, okay, what's kind of going on here? So I went back, watched all of the Clone Wars as quickly as one can, and I really just sort of fell in love with this animated section of Star Wars that they have going on, because obviously with it being a TV show, you can give so much more information than just what we get in the movies. Like, The Force Awakens, it's like, all right, you have about 2 hours of information you can put in there. But like you mentioned, Clone Wars was just over 30 hours of Star Wars, basically. And I know the season didn't really finish how they wanted it to with this final season.
Yeah.
And I think that's why one just got dropped all on Netflix on the same day. And, I went to StarWars.com today just before we recorded, and I had no clue that they had a ton of Q&A videos with Dave Filoni, who did Clone Wars, and now he's doing Rebels. So I feel like I now have some more content to go check out because it's the Lost Missions Q&A. So I get the feeling it fills in some of those blanks that we were left with at the end.
Yeah, that final season, season 6 or whatever, isn't really a season. It's just called the Lost Missions, and
yeah,
there's actually a lot of supplemental material to it. There's some like unfinished episodes that are just like animatics that have been put together. Some of it they've culled together to turn into like a comic book series, and there's a lot of actual like supplemental material based on the Lost Missions season. And honestly, that's my favorite season of the Clone Wars. Like they go to such crazy like dark territory and explore such adult themes. It's like I was just like I was actually kind of reviewing some of those episodes this week, knowing that the podcast was coming up, and man, that they really just nail some stuff there that I think that they kind of didn't hit on so well in the movies. I was blown away. The Lost Missions is awesome.
Yeah, and I even watched that animated Clone Wars movie, even though it didn't really add too much to the show or anything. But I was like, all right, well, it's on Netflix, so I might as well watch that too. And like you said, that last season there was really good. And even though they didn't get to end it quite the way they wanted to, it's still, like you said, these darker themes. And it's amazing to me that this is a show that aired on Cartoon Network.
I know. I was thinking about the episode where, or the whole run of episodes where Fives, the clone trooper, he's chasing down this conspiracy theory about the chips inside their head, which obviously wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was real. It was the chips that were implanted to enact Order 66. But it was such a great, like, well done conspiracy thriller run of episodes. Like, it reminded me of, some of these like kind of paranoia spy thriller, movies, but just incredibly well done. And back to your point about some of the, adult things that aired on Cartoon Network, when he dies, he gets like blasted in the chest and kind of dies. It's like, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, kids watch this.
Yeah, it definitely felt like more of an adult animated show at certain points. And, now Star Wars Rebels is on Disney XD. And, even that sometimes I'm like, wait, do kids actually watch this? Or is that show on the kids channel for the parents, really? You know what I mean?
Well, the thing is, the tone was very uneven. Like, let me preface this by saying that, like, the Clone Wars series, to me, and this is going to be blasphemous, but it's the definitive Star Wars to me. Aside from Empire Strikes Back, I think that the Clone Wars really, defines what the Star Wars universe is about, what the themes are, what the stakes are, in a way that, I don't think that, well, obviously the prequels were just terrible. Sorry. But then, even rewatching A New Hope recently, it's a really fun movie. It's great, but they kind of did very broad strokes about what the Force was and what the stakes were. And I think that they kind of retconned a lot of the story after the fact. And Empire Strikes Back is just a masterpiece, and everything, subsequently has been defined by what they established in Empire Strikes Back. But the Clone Wars, just watching it from start to finish, everything is done such great service. Like you really develop empathy and compassion for these characters. You really, grasp such a strong understanding of what the Force is about and the hubris of the Jedi and just, I sound like such a geek right now. But
that's the whole point of this.
But it's like, to me, like, the Clone Wars is, if I wanted to explain to some person who had never seen Star Wars or heard of Star Wars before, I'd have them watch the Clone Wars, because it's so thoroughly, goes through just what the Star Wars universe is supposed to be. And I don't know, I'm done gushing.
No, I totally understand what you mean, because to me, I feel like this is a better prequel to Anakin becoming Darth Vader than the actual prequels were. And I mean,
certainly.
we don't see it happen, but it's like you can see in that 6th season, it is slowly but surely happening. And, you get all of these little hints at things, and it really is a bummer that they didn't get to finish it out, because I think if they were able to do that and do all the way up to him becoming Darth Vader, it's like they could have just wiped out the prequel trilogy altogether with this series.
I totally agree. Because I always imagined, most of the Sith that we're exposed to in the movies, in the Clone Wars, have kind of dual identities where they are Darth this or Darth that, but they also are a person. So
right.
Count Dooku is Count Dooku, but he's also Darth Tyrannus, and then Palpatine is Darth Sidious, and they kind of have these dual personalities. And what I had always imagined, even before they had done the prequel films, was that Anakin had started descending to the dark side before he ever fell into the lava and got his whole body all messed up and turned into the Darth Vader that we know, and that
right.
he could have had a separate identity as Darth Vader even concurrently while he was Anakin Skywalker Jedi Knight. And I thought that would have been really compelling, and they kind of, I think that they really bridged the gap well with, especially in the final season. Anakin's, his demeanor is starting to evolve into being more aggressive. When he interrogates people, he's starting to force choke people. When you see him fight with Barriss Offee, the girl who tried to frame Ahsoka for murder,
right.
Boy, he just kicks her ass and pins her up against a tree using the force choke, and you're just like, whoa, this guy's definitely going to be Darth Vader someday.
Yeah.
and you never get that from the movies. It's just this switch flips where he's just good old Anakin Skywalker, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm going to be a Sith now because I don't want my wife to die. It's like, come on.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing with this being animated and the difference between the prequels is yes, you can use CGI in, movies and everything, but when you have straight animation, I feel like that gives them a lot more to work with, because they don't have to factor in, if we CGI this with, actual actors and actresses in it, is it going to look bad? Is it going, it's, when it's animated, it's all completely a made up world. And I think with something like Star Wars, that's really effective. And I mean, you could even argue that, just the difference between the original trilogy and the prequels, obviously technology improved a lot, but I still think when you go look back at the original trilogy for the time they made that and what they had to work with, it still stands up pretty well now. I mean, obviously The Force Awakens is the epitome of being able to use technology in a Star Wars movie. And I just think the animated series gives it a much different feel, and it's sort of you can just get completely lost in these characters because you're not seeing them as the actors and actresses who play them necessarily.
I completely agree. I think that there's an element of suspension of disbelief, where it all looks so seamless. You're just kind of invested into this world. You're not questioning, is that real, or where did that come from? And when you're watching the Clone Wars, and that is something that I really enjoy. And I again, not to hate on Rebels or anything, but I enjoy the animation of Clone Wars more than Rebels. It's slightly different, slightly less. The characters look a little bit less exaggerated, a little bit more human-like.
Right.
But yeah, and I totally agree with you too with the original trilogy. I think because so much of it was done with practical effects and miniatures, that it feels real in a way that the CG and the prequels didn't really achieve.
Yeah.
And I thought that was something they did really well with The Force Awakens, was that they implemented a lot of practical effects, a lot of makeup, a lot of monster kind of stuff, puppets, miniatures, that kind of stuff, and then took it to the next level with the CG rather than completely depending on the CG. I read that when they shot the prequels, that they actually they only built the sets to go to about head height of the average actor on set. And Liam Neeson was so tall that his head was peeking above the top of the set. So when he's walking down the hallways in the Jedi temple, they had to CG in about like 3 feet above his head. And it cost like millions of dollars for every time he had to do scenes.
Yeah, it's like at that point, just, build it up 5 more feet and get over it,
Just build it. Yeah, like, come on, man.
That would have been so much less money to add those extra 5 feet or whatever instead of trying to CG everything.
I feel like that principle is pretty much what's wrong with the prequel trilogy. Like, it's the whole thing is just putting the cart before the horse, and just I don't know. I think Dave Filoni just really. What a great person to entrust with the Clone Wars series, because he just really got it. There's obvious love and care invested in all the characters. I love how you even begin to empathize with some of the villains over the course of the series, and that really shows what a labor of love it was that they didn't make the villains these like mustache twirling doofuses like they did with General Grievous in the prequel films. That they made you actually feel something for Asajj Ventress,
right?
That you felt for Darth Maul, and I don't know. It's like I think that's a really unique experience. Not even just in Star Wars films, but just in general. When you empathize with the villains, it really makes the whole experience more engrossing. So I can't sing the praises high enough for this series.
Yeah, and I know you said you only watched the first season of Rebels, but if you ended up loving Ahsoka as much as I did by the end of the Clone Wars, I definitely recommend following through and watching the rest of Rebels, because if I do remember correctly, the first season was a little rocky for me, but then it really started to get better as it's gone on. And I think because Dave Filoni is also working on Rebels, they obviously couldn't pick up right where the Clone Wars left off.
Sure.
But I think, that first season was sort of him finding his footing with this new story to go about. And I think, they've kind of found that, and it's getting pretty good.
Nice. I rewatched the run of episodes where Ahsoka is framed for murder and is expelled from the Jedi Order and then goes on trial, and boy, I started getting teared up at the end when the Jedi Council tries to get her to come back to be a Jedi Knight, and she turns them down, and Anakin chases after her, and when they say their final goodbye, he says, I understand wanting to leave the Jedi Order more than you know, and she says, I know. And it's like it kind of adds this subtext to the whole relationship over the course of the series, because she's been mentored by him for so long that she wasn't as, I guess she was playing dumb a little bit about knowing what was going on in the background with his relationship with Padme and his kind of inner turmoil, and that kind of hits you hard, and then you start thinking about, dang, this is the last time that they're gonna see each other as Anakin and Ahsoka. I'm assuming at this point that she confronts Darth Vader, because why bring her onto Rebels if that doesn't happen?
Right.
but it's like wow, what a powerful thing. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting teary-eyed at a cartoon. Oh, Ahsoka.
Obviously, with Ahsoka, she spent the most time with Anakin, even more so than Padme or Obi-Wan did. And it's like, you understand how she knew all of these things, and she also understood that it wasn't really her place to bring it up or say anything until Anakin was willing to bring it up. And I think the way they handled that relationship between the two was just so fantastic throughout the run. Yeah. And, you see Ahsoka kind of see him going off the rails, knowing she can't do anything about it. And then when you see her leave, you're like, oh, and it's like seeing her leave in that moment and then picking up where Rebel starts. Yeah. You kind of get this picture of, what happened in between. And I think having that continuity without actually having to have episodes that shows it is why, I think Rebels has been starting to get better and better.
That's awesome. But what what a testament to, Filoni and the writers, just that they never had to spell out that subtext to us,
Right.
and rather than, it just seems like everything was done so heavy-handed in the prequels and even in a couple places in the original trilogy, but with this it was like, damn, like, Ahsoka has known this whole time. She never preached to him, never judged him, like she's it's really cool, and it says a lot about the Jedi Padawan relationship as well, that they were that close, and it's just staggering.
Yeah, definitely. And Clone Wars will definitely get someone completely engrossed into, the Star Wars world if it's the first thing they watch, especially, they aired it on Cartoon Network, so obviously it was geared more towards kids. But like you and I watching it as adults, it's like we probably got a lot of these little side things that not necessarily kids would get. And I feel like, they've been doing this a lot in cartoons forever. There's always, that little aspect that's meant for the adults to get who are watching this with their kids.
Yeah.
But then we're adults just watching this because it's Star Wars. It has nothing to do with kids at all. And I think when you have a show like this, I don't think there is an age limit on being able to enjoy it. And I can kind of say the same thing about Rebels, but with this one more so, just because, we've now been able to see it as a completed work, or mostly completed as far as, Cartoon Network would let them. But it's just so engrossing. And I know personally I've been getting into the books and the comic books and pretty much anything and everything Star Wars canon at the moment. And I don't know if you've been following along with those either, but I know the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic book that started in January, it's like starting to hit Marvel Unlimited. So I've gotten a few issues into it, and I think that's going to be a nice little prequel even to the Clone Wars as it continues.
Yeah, the Marvel's just been knocking the new Star Wars comics out of the park. Like they are so good. The Lando series was amazing. I never thought that I would be so, like, I thought Lando was cool. Like, it's Lando, of course he's cool, but I never thought, like, boy, I would love to read a comic book series about this guy. And it's just amazing. Like, they are just firing on all cylinders. Whatever brain trust is putting those comics together and the stories, it's like, it's so good. It makes me really excited to see Donald Glover play Lando. But Dr. Aphra is getting her own comic book. You know who Aphra is, right?
Yeah.
Kind of Darth Vader's sidekick in his comic book series, or sidekick exactly. She kind of facilitates his reign of terror. But
right.
It's awesome. They've got they're expanding that whole comic book side of the universe, and it is just fascinating. I don't know how much time we have, but I want to take us back for a second, because I was just thinking about this when we were talking about Ahsoka being aware of Anakin's kind of forbidden relationship and love with Padme. And another episode that I rewatched recently, there's this character who appears periodically throughout the prequels, who's Satine. You remember Satine?
Yes,
it was,
yeah.
The woman that Obi-Wan Kenobi always had this kind of, it was like subtle how they showed it on the screen, but there was always chemistry, and you kind of it wasn't really said, but more implied that they had a history. And when she dies, she says, "I love you. I've always loved you." And it's really heartbreaking, and you realize that they had this forbidden love as well. And it made me kind of cringe a little bit that wasn't something that was able to be, mined in Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship in the films or in the prequels, that they had more in common than Anakin realized. Anakin didn't I don't think he ever realized how much Obi-Wan had been through what he had been through, struggling with that desire for that, relationship, and knowing that it was forbidden. And I wish that they could have gone there and talked about it.
Yeah, and I think, maybe the only problem with that is then if, Obi-Wan kind of talks him down and and Anakin realizes, oh, hey, this is something other people have been through too, then who knows, maybe he never becomes Darth Vader if he has that conversation with
That's
Obi-Wan.
That's a really great point. I'm like, gosh, why couldn't they have worked out their problems?
Yeah, the only real consequence I can think of there, but it would be a pretty big one in terms of, the rest of the Star Wars universe.
He's like, well, geez, maybe I won't become Darth Vader.
Maybe this isn't so bad.
I guess a little unresolved conflict is good for Star Wars.
Yeah. So do you think if they had the chance to sort of either go back and revisit the Clone Wars, do you think you would want them to? Or do you think even though it ended sort of abruptly, that the way they were able to close it out was sufficient enough to where you're okay with, maybe going and checking out the rest of Rebels to see how that turns out?
I was thinking about this, and I think that what a really great thing would be is not necessarily for them to go back and revisit the Clone Wars, but for, because the Clone Wars series only covers a 3-year period in the entire Star Wars canon. 3 years.
Right.
Between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So that's a very small amount of time. But I thought that the series was executed so well, and it was just so awesome. And I love Star Wars mythology so much that I would love for them to tackle, another kind of tumultuous time period in the same fashion. Like, I'd love to see another 100-episode arc of them covering, maybe the events leading up to The Force Awakens. Something like that would be really cool.
Yeah, and this ended basically in 2014 when the final season was dropped on Netflix, and then obviously with Rebels being in its 3rd season now, at least I think it's 3rd. It could be 2nd. I'm not sure on that, but I will check and correct myself if I'm wrong. But it's like basically
third.
Yeah, basically then Rebels started almost right after they had wrapped up with the Clone Wars, and I think, they jumped such a big time gap. I don't know how big exactly it is, but obviously, when Ahsoka makes her appearance in Rebels, she's much older and obviously wiser than she was when, we saw her as this Padawan who kind of did similar things to Anakin and how she didn't listen. And I think, she's much more refined and everything in Rebels, and I think she's the one piece that will keep people, who really enjoyed the Clone Wars coming back to the Rebels show to see, when she pops up in it, because, obviously you've watched the first season. She's not in every single episode, and it's really interesting to kind of see how things play out with this one character, especially because I know for me, at least, by the end of Clone Wars, she definitely became probably my favorite character out of the whole series, even though I really enjoyed most of the characters in Clone Wars. Sure. And I think a lot of people felt that way about her character when Clone Wars ended. So it's like, the ones who continued on and are still following, it's like, she brings that one piece of excitement that they need to keep following along.
Yeah, I'm aware that, because it was just blew up on the internet, but that, obviously she confronts Vader in this last season. But when I found out that was happening, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get caught up and watch. Like, I've got it on my plan to watch season 2 and then this season, just because that's like, I just can't even imagine. Like, my imagination's just running wild at like what an emotionally charged, crazy thing that is. And like, is Anakin still in there underneath that mask? Obviously he doesn't really get redeemed until Luke confronts him on the second Death Star. But to kind of see even a hint at his humanity underneath the mask, in being approached by Ahsoka, I think that I'm really, really excited to see that. This is so geeky. I love it.
That's definitely the whole point of this podcast. And, next episode, I actually will be talking about Star Wars Rebels more in depth, but I just do want to say that, she's not the only Clone Wars character who comes back, because obviously, as you know, she faces off with Darth Vader, who is Anakin. And
Yeah.
like you said, as soon as Ahsoka comes back into Rebels, it's kind of a given that that scene specifically is going to happen. But there's still, little bits and pieces you're getting from the Clone Wars. And I think, that's really what Dave Filoni is great at, when he picks out these little details and brings them over, even though, it's, 15, 20 years later, whatever it is, and it's just crazy to see. I know you said there's obviously a little bit of difference in the animation, and one was on Cartoon Network, and this is now Disney XD, which I think it's like not their regular channel. It's kind of like an offshoot channel that I didn't even know existed until I started watching Star Wars Rebels. And then I was like, oh, wow, look at how bad all the children commercials are. So I think it's just great that they were able to keep, especially Dave Filoni, on for both series, because I think he did such a great job with the Clone Wars that it's like, you kind of can't do anything animated without him at this point. I feel like that would be a huge disservice, not only to him, but to all of the Star Wars fans.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like what we have in Filoni is somebody who gets what Star Wars could be, like what it is in our imaginations. We were all, I think, collectively disappointed. Even people that, have respect for the prequel trilogy have to admit, there was a collective disappointment out there in the series being so mishandled at that point. And this, this guy obviously cradled and kind of nurtured this idea of what the Star Wars universe is supposed to be with the Clone Wars series. So, I mean, I will follow that guy to whatever project he does from now on. He's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's some characters coming back from Clone Wars into Rebels, and that reminded me, this character from Clone Wars is going to be appearing in Rogue One.
Okay.
Saw Gerrera. So
yeah.
It's Forrest Whitaker's character, and he's playing Saw Gerrera. And there was a story arc where I believe it was him and his sister were leading a rebellion against the Separatists, and the Jedi were kind of training them to be freedom fighters. And it's a great run and stuff. But what was intriguing to me was that, wow, so we can get these Clone Wars characters that will actually show up in physical form in a the standalone Star Wars movies now. And that's like, that opens up a whole world. Like I'm just like wondering if we're ever going to see like, Asajj Ventress, like played by an actress out there,
Yeah, definitely. And I do remember seeing that as well. And I was like, oh yeah, he's that guy from Clone Wars. And it's just really cool how this animated series had such a big influence, especially with a character like Saul, who's not really a main character. And they still managed to find a place for him in a movie like Rogue One. And, I think this is really sort of the new era for Star Wars. I know a lot of people probably thought it was The Force Awakens because that's the most recent live action movie. But I think when this started in 2008, it's like it was almost a fresh start instead of the prequels. And I think, ever since this show started airing, it's like, okay, they've been running through all of these ideas. And like you mentioned, they do little runs. You don't really have too many standalone episodes, I would say. It's like you get 3 or 4 episodes in a row that are about the same thing. Yes. And I think that really helps with the story building. It's not like, some of these TV shows we get where it's kind of like a Law and Order SVU type thing where it's, a different thing each week and you only have these little storylines on the side. I think the way they did this, the way they did this really led up to that storytelling, and they were able to build up these characters in a much better way.
Well, I get chills watching that Rogue One trailer now when, Forrest Whitaker's like, what will you do? And I'm like, I'm just thinking about this like grizzled guy who's been a freedom fighter for, all of his life, before he was fighting against the Separatists, now he's fighting against the Empire. And it's like, and just thinking about that, this weathered guy who was like this kind of young, scrappy, good-looking leader when he started, and now he's like all old and beat from just fighting the good fight for so long, and I was like, really, the Clone Wars series is kind of like Weezer's Pinkerton record, where it was like unceremoniously dumped. It's like, oh, we're just gonna scrap it, drop the last season onto Netflix. But it really was like the genesis of this new generation of Star Wars love. I feel like dropping Saw Gerrera's character into Rogue One is kind of a tip of the hat to that, because I know that the new kind of people administrating Lucasfilm hold Filoni in a very high regard, and they realize how beloved he is by the fans, and it's I don't know, it's really cool that they get it, that they get that, man, we really, really nailed the Clone Wars series. We got to keep doing this.
Yeah. And for me with the Clone Wars series, it's like, even though I watched it after The Force Awakens, that didn't really bother me at all, or even after I started watching Rebels, because like you said, the way you and I both binge watched it, it's like you just get so lost in the Clone Wars for, a month, or if you take a little longer, 2 months, whatever. And it sort of just kind of revives all of your feelings for Star Wars. You can just sort of build off of that now, with Rebels being back in its 3rd season right now. And, for me, it's like, I was watching that when Rebels was in between seasons. So it's like, I saw these things happening in Rebels, and I was like, okay, I'm a little confused, but not too confused. So I'll just go, binge watch the Clone Wars, and it filled in so much more than I was expecting it to. And, like I said, it wasn't really like something like Law and Order SVU, which, those shows are totally fine. They have their place. And personally, I enjoy a lot of shows like that. But with something like Star Wars, I feel like you can't do the one bad guy a week sort of thing like they've been doing.
Monster of the week, yeah.
Yeah, and because like you said, Clone Wars only takes place in a 3-year period, and you have these guys who come back over and over again trying to defeat the Jedi, like General Grievous and, all of these Darth whoever's. Yeah. And it's fun for the fans when you get to see these characters, these villains, come back over and over again, and they're not showing them in the same light, or they're not having, the same fight over and over and over again. It's always slightly different.
Yeah, it's not like Megatron and the Decepticons showing up every week on Transformers and like, we're gonna steal the Energon and blow up the Earth, and then the Autobots save the day, and then they just show up and do it again next week. It's super serialized, and it's a lot more enriching that way, I think, because just the relationships you build with the characters is so much deeper. There are a handful of episodes and 2-episode arcs that are like just complete fluff throughout the series, where I'm like, what is there's a couple that are like very who's that fucking Gungan, Jar Jar Binks.
Yes, Jar Jar. How could we forget Jar Jar?
I've purged his name from my memory. There's a couple single episodes and double episode arcs with Jar Jar, and there's a few other times throughout the series that are just like completely, like, if you excised those from the series and got rid of them, you wouldn't even notice, because they didn't really achieve anything. And those are a little bit hard to stomach at times.
Yeah.
But there's only a handful of them. There's very little fat on the series.
Yeah, and the series was around 120, 121 episodes, something like that. So, if you only get a few of those episodes, to me, that's still extremely successful, because how many times do you hear nerds like us saying about the live action comic book shows, like, oh, it should have only been, 15 episodes, not 20 episodes this season, or whatever. Or even with, these Netflix shows that Marvel is doing, I think they're all 13 episode seasons, and some people are like, you guys could have just done 8 or 10 episodes.
That's right. Cut them down to 8 and they're perfect.
Yeah. And, at least with Netflix, with the way you binge watch those series more often than not, it's like it all kind of blends together anyway, and you can't even really tell you just watched 13 episodes. You're just like, I just watched a very, very, very long movie.
there's if I don't want to get too off topic, but like there's some times where I'm like watching, like I just watched Luke Cage, which I loved. I thought it was great, but there's like it's like the same thing that happened in the first season of Daredevil and the first season of Jessica Jones, where like right around episode 8 or 9, I'm like, is this over soon? Like, it's kind of, like, do I really need to see an episode that's all about this like ancillary character? Like, it's like, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, of course, Clone Wars is going to go into that a little bit, but I think that it got a lot leaner and meaner as it goes along, though, where there's a lot of stuff that happens that's just kind of, not necessarily essential to canon, in the first couple seasons. And then as it gets closer and closer to the end and the pace is picking up and the stakes are, getting bigger and bigger, they were just nailing it over and over and over again with the, the whole arc about the clone troopers chips, for Order 66, and Ahsoka's, whole arc leaving the Jedi Order, and then especially Yoda's last arc where he goes to find how come I'm hearing Qui-Gon Jinn's voice in my head, and he's kind of out there exploring, like, hold on a second, so this isn't it when we die, and how do you manifest your consciousness through the Force, and he learns so much that has implications that reverberate even into the new movies, and I think that we're going to see that kind of resonate into The Force Awakens, honestly.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to point out about Clone Wars is, they didn't necessarily have these big name actors and actresses voicing these characters. I know in Rebels they sort of went more big name, like they have Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan, and he's not your typical voice actor, but for the Clone Wars they have actors and actresses who have pretty much specifically only done voice work. Yeah. And, the guy who plays Anakin or voices Anakin, Matt Lanter, now he's on an actual like live action TV show. I believe he's on that Timeless show, which is like a non-comic book time traveling show. So
he's on that show?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I've been watching that show. I didn't know that was him.
Yeah, because I clicked on him on IMDb and I was like, oh, he's that dude I see in all those commercials for that time traveling show. But yeah, kidding? So he plays Wyatt Logan. Yeah.
Yeah, he's such a good voice actor. I can't even believe that. Like,
yeah.
He imbued Anakin with so much, humanity over the course of that series, where it's like you really I'm really struck by like a profound sense of loss that Anakin turns to the dark side and what could have been. And, just because you end up caring about the character so much, which is not how I felt after seeing the prequel trilogy.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, you didn't realize it was the same guy and you've been watching Timeless. And for me, going to high school with Taylor Gray and now him voicing Ezra, because I don't see his face, I'm like, is that actually him? Like, it's still so weird to me. And, we weren't super close friends or anything. It's just like we had a couple of classes together here and there. Sure. And I watch Rebels still, and I'm like, this is still so weird, because it's like, I know it's his voice, but to me, it's like, it doesn't really feel like it's him. And then, it's like he'll do some acting in other shows and it's not voice acting, and I'm like, no, I guess it is him.
Oh, well, that's good to know. I'm gonna see that guy in a different light now while I'm watching that show.
You're gonna be like, darn you, Anakin.
I'm like, Anakin, why didn't you talk to Obi-Wan about this and work it out instead of becoming Darth Vader?
Yeah, and I've noticed in that show, they've made little jokes towards other shows. I think in one of the commercials, they were like, yeah, we're so-and-so from General Hospital. So It would be hilarious if they put in a Star Wars joke in there. I think, if that happens, let me know and I will watch that episode.
That's funny. Yeah, it is funny because there's that whole world of voice actors where you like, like to me it's like Kevin Conroy's Batman. Like he'll always be Batman to me. Like that's the voice of Batman. That's like he just nails it. Although I didn't see the new Killing Joke cartoon because it looks, and I hear it's terrible.
It's pretty bad. It's like they just completely went to an unnecessary level for it, and I will definitely stick with the comic book in the future.
I loved the comic book when I was a kid. Like Because I've just seen little memes online of like Batman having sex with Batgirl, and I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
I'm like, that didn't happen.
You're like, no, that's not how this goes.
That's like the opposite of what's the Bechdel test, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, this is exactly what you're not supposed to do with a strong female character. Like, make it so that she just wants to bang her mentor. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So definitely you're on the right side of this by not watching it. It'll save you like an hour and a half of your life.
ODC Comics, if I could have all the hour and a half back of my life for all their movies recently.
Yeah, I still haven't watched Suicide Squad, but we have Rogue One coming up, so hopefully that will make up for some of the bad movies we've seen this year.
There you go. Doctor Strange is out today, so I want to go see that.
Yeah, I definitely need to go see that too. But do you have any final thoughts on Clone Wars? Obviously, you and I both love the series, and it's nicely timed so that we're talking about this episode, and then next episode I will be talking with the Star Wars Master of Knowledge, Jacob Tender, all about
Yes.
Star Wars Rebels. So I think, it's really cool to just kind of tie these two things together, and I feel like had I done it to where we did Clone Wars and then I did different topics and then did Rebels, I'm not sure it would have the same effect that I'm hoping we get with the episodes back to back.
No, I think it's just a good space to inhabit, and I think that they, even though Rebels is quite a bit different, I think they are spiritual cousins, and I think I'm excited to hear your guys' next episode. Now, I was really happy you asked me to do this podcast with you. This has been fun, and I absolutely adore the Clone Wars, and it's I don't know, I just have such a passion for it, and it's nice to geek out with a fellow Clone Wars fan.
Yeah, well, how about we make a deal? We will both go see Rogue One in December, and we can pick up with that after the holidays and do an episode on that.
That sounds awesome.
Perfect. Gotta get as many of these planned as I can ahead of time.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Bobby, for coming on, and to our listeners, thank you for listening like you guys always do, and enjoy the rest of your day.
May the Force be with you.